Welcome to Stellar Narratives. The Korean Peninsula has been inhabited for over 5,000 years. In that time, it has produced kingdoms that rivaled China in cultural sophistication, generals who stopped Mongol armies that had never been defeated anywhere else, and rulers who changed not just their nation, but the entire trajectory of East Asian history. In this video, we are counting down the 10 greatest rulers in Korean history, ranked by their achievements, their leadership, and the lasting mark they left on the Korean people. We are covering their greatest accomplishments, the threats they faced, the wars they fought, and the legacy they built. We also have one special mention at the end. A man who was not a king, but whose story is so extraordinary, and whose impact on Korean survival so absolute, that no video about Korean greatness is complete without him. Stay until the very end, because number one on this list created something that over 75 million people use every single day. He created it in less than 3 years, against the opposition of almost his entire court, in the middle of a reign already filled with remarkable achievements. Let us begin. Number 10. King Dongmyeong, founder of Goguryeo, reigned 37 to 19 BC. Every great Korean story begins somewhere. This is where one of them begins. King Dongmyeong, also known by his birth name Jinheung, is the legendary founder of the Goguryeo kingdom, one of the 3 kingdoms that dominated the Korean Peninsula for centuries. His origin story is one of the most dramatic founding myths in East Asian history. Born to a divine father and a human mother, abandoned as an infant, raised in secret, betrayed by jealous half-brothers, he fled across the Amnok River on the backs of fish and turtles who rose from the water to carry him to safety, and then founded a kingdom from nothing in the northern territories. Historians treat the mythological elements with appropriate skepticism. But behind the legend, there appears to have been a real chieftain who united the Goryeo people and surrounding tribes in the 1st century BC, establishing the political foundation of what would become one of the most powerful kingdoms on the Korean Peninsula. Goguryeo, at its height, controlled the entire northern Korean peninsula and a vast territory in Manchuria. It fought the Chinese Han Dynasty to a standstill. It resisted the Sui Dynasty invasions that broke China's military power. It produced warriors of legendary reputation. None of that happens without the foundation that Dongmyeong laid. He may be more legend than history, but the kingdom he founded was absolutely real, and it shaped the Korean Peninsula for 700 years. You cannot tell the story of Korea without beginning here. Number 9. King Jeongjo, Joseon Dynasty, reigned 1776 to 1800. King Jeongjo of Joseon came to the throne under a shadow that would have destroyed most men. His father, Crown Prince Sado, had been executed by order of Jeongjo's own grandfather, the reigning king, sealed alive inside a rice chest in 1762 and left to die over 8 days. The political factions that had engineered his father's death were still powerful at court when Jeongjo took the throne at 24 years old. many of them expected to control him. They had completely misjudged the man. Jeongjo was one of the most intellectually capable rulers in Korean history. He established the Gwangjong, a royal library and research institute that he used to cultivate a new class of loyal scholars independent from the established noble factions that had dominated Joseon politics for generations. He deliberately recruited talented men, regardless of their family background, breaking the grip of hereditary privilege on government office. He reformed the military, restructured the tax system to reduce the burden on commoners, and invested in the city of Suwon, constructing the Hwasong Fortress, a magnificent walled city that incorporated the most advanced military architecture of the era and which stands today as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. He was a genuine intellectual. He wrote extensively, read voraciously, and engaged personally in policy debates rather than delegating everything to ministers. He corresponded with the Catholic missionaries who were beginning to enter Korea, approaching new ideas with curiosity rather than fear. He died suddenly in 1800 at 47 years old, possibly from a combination of illness and the accumulated stress of ruling against constant factional opposition. His reforms did not survive him. The factions he had worked his entire reign to contain immediately reasserted control after his death. What Joseon might have become under another 2 decades of Jeongjo is one of Korean history's most haunting questions. Number 8. King Jinheung. Silla Kingdom. Reigned 540 to 576. King Jinheung took the smallest of the 3 kingdoms and turned it into the one that would eventually swallow the other 2. When Jinheung came to power in 540, Silla was the weakest and most isolated of the 3 kingdoms, lacking the fertile plains of beach to the west and the vast territory of Goguryeo to the north. Jinheung changed everything through a combination of military expansion, diplomatic skill, and a cultural investment that would prove more enduring than any battlefield victory. He created and formalized the Hwarang, an elite corps of young male warriors trained not only in combat but in poetry, music, philosophy, and Confucian ethics. The Hwarang became the defining military and cultural institution of Silla, producing some of the finest commanders in Korean history and establishing a warrior culture that valued the complete development of mind and body simultaneously. They were simultaneously a military academy, a philosophical school, and a social institution. On the battlefield, Jinheung expanded Silla's territory aggressively, pushing into the Han River Basin, the most strategically valuable region on the peninsula, and establishing direct access to the Yellow Sea that gave Silla the ability to trade and communicate with China independently of its rivals. He also absorbed the smaller Gaya Confederation to the south, consolidating the lower peninsula under Silla control. By the end of his reign, Silla had transformed from a regional power into the dominant force in southern Korea, positioned perfectly for the alliances and campaigns that would eventually produce Korean unification under his successors. Jinheung planted the seed. A century later, Silla harvested the whole peninsula. Number 7. King Gwangjong. Goryeo Dynasty. Reigned 949 to 975. King Gwangjong looked at the most powerful men in his kingdom and told them their slaves were free. In 956, Gwangjong issued the Slave Investigation Act, one of the most radical social policies in the history of Korean governance. Under the act, people who had been illegally enslaved, many of them commoners who had been captured in war or pressed into slavery through debt during the chaos of the late Silla period, were to be identified and freed. The great noble families who controlled enormous numbers of slaves were furious. Their economic and military power depended on slave labor. Gwangjong issued the act anyway. He followed it with a civil service examination system modeled on China's, opening government positions to men of talent regardless of aristocratic birth. The old Goryeo nobility, whose families had held positions by hereditary right, found themselves competing with educated commoners for influence. They were furious about that too. Gwangjong did not particularly care about the fury of the powerful. He executed or exiled hundreds of aristocratic opponents in the later years of his reign, using information gathered through a spy network that extended throughout the court. His methods were harsh, and his later years had a paranoid quality that historians have noted with concern. But the structural reforms he made, weakening hereditary noble power, expanding the civil service, and reducing the slave population, strengthened the Goryeo state significantly. He also established the distinctive royal purple robes and court ceremony that gave Goryeo kingship a visual authority it had previously lacked, literally dressing the monarchy in the language of power. A king who freed the enslaved and built a meritocracy in the 10th century. That is not a small achievement in any era. Number 6. King Munmu. Silla Kingdom. Reigned 661 to 681. King Munmu did what no ruler before him had managed in all of Korean history. He unified the entire peninsula under a single government. The Three Kingdoms period, the centuries of rivalry and war between Goguryeo, Baekd, and Silla, ended on Munmu's watch. It was not a clean or simple achievement. It required a complex and ultimately dangerous alliance with the Tang dynasty of China, which Silla used to defeat Baekd in 660 and Goguryeo in 668. Unification was achieved. Korea had one ruler for the first time in its history. Then Munmu did something requiring as much courage as any battlefield campaign. He turned against his Chinese allies. The Tang dynasty, having helped Silla destroy its enemies, now expected to absorb the Korean Peninsula into its own empire. Munmu refused. He launched a series of military campaigns against Tang forces stationed on the peninsula between 670 and 676, expelling them from Korean territory while simultaneously managing the internal challenges of integrating three formerly hostile kingdoms into a single state. He won. Korea remained Korean. Munmu spent his entire reign either fighting or managing the consequences of fighting, and he governed with the understanding that every decision carried existential weight. He died in 681 and, according to his own final wishes, was buried at sea. He reportedly said he wanted to become a sea dragon to protect Korea from Japanese pirates even in death. A rock in the sea off the coast of Jeongjo is still called Munmu's tomb today. The people who visit it believe he is still there, keeping watch. Number 5. King Taejo of Joseon, Seonggye, reigned 1392 to 1398. Seonggye was one of the finest military commanders in Korean history. He used that reputation to do something none of his predecessors had managed. He replaced an entire dynasty. The Goryeo dynasty, by the late 14th century, was exhausted, weakened by decades of Mongol domination, internal corruption, and repeated Japanese pirate raids that devastated the coastline. Seonggye had built his reputation as the general who actually solved the pirate problem, winning decisive victories against Japanese raiders and against the remnants of Mongol power in the north. He was the most respected military figure in the country. In 1388, he was ordered to lead a campaign against Ming Dynasty China. He marched his army to the border, stopped, calculated the political and military reality, and turned around. The Wihua Island retreat, as it became known, was technically an act of military insubordination. In practice, it was a declaration of political intent. He returned to the capital, removed the king, and within 4 years had placed himself on the throne of an entirely new dynasty. The Joseon dynasty he founded lasted 518 years. It is one of the longest ruling dynasties in world history. He chose Confucianism as the state philosophy, restructured the entire government around Confucian principles, moved the capital to Hanseong, the city that is now Seoul, and established the administrative framework that governed Korea until the late 19th century. He abdicated in 1398, following a brutal succession struggle among his sons that he could not bring himself to resolve, and spent his final years in retirement, watching his children fight over what he had built. The capital he chose is still the capital of South Korea today. The dynasty he founded shaped Korean identity more deeply than any other single institution in the past 1,000 years. Number 4. Queen Seondeok, Silla Kingdom, reigned 632 to 647. Korea's first female ruler governed one of the most turbulent periods in the peninsula's history with intelligence, political skill, and a cultural vision that left a permanent mark on her nation. Queen Seondeok came to the Silla throne in 632 as the eldest daughter of King Jinheung, who had no male heirs. Her right to rule was immediately contested. Rival factions within Silla opposed a female monarch on principle. The kingdoms of Goguryeo and Beach saw an opportunity in what they believed would be a weakened reign and launched military campaigns against Silla's borders almost immediately. Seondeok proved them all wrong. She formed the crucial alliance with Tang Dynasty China that would eventually lead to Korean unification under her successors. demonstrating diplomatic intelligence that her predecessors had not managed. She cultivated talented commanders, including the great General Kim Yushin, who would become one of the most celebrated military figures in Korean history and who won the campaigns that kept Silla's borders intact throughout her reign. She built Seonggye, the oldest surviving astronomical observatory in Asia, a circular stone tower used to track the movements of celestial bodies and calculate agricultural calendars. It still stands in Jeongjo today, 1,300 years after she ordered its construction. She invested in Buddhism as a cultural and political force, commissioning temples and pagodas that brought Korean art and architecture to a level that rivaled anything on the continent. There is a famous story that speaks to the qualities her court most admired in her. She predicted the arrival of enemy troops based on the absence of frog calls near a particular pond in winter, calculating that frogs would only be silent in cold water if large numbers of men were nearby heating the area with their bodies. Her commanders investigated and found the enemy forces exactly where she predicted. Whether the story is literally true is debated. That her court told it admiringly for generations is not. A woman who ruled in the 7th century against every expectation and was celebrated for it. That is a genuinely remarkable story. Number 3. King Taejo Gwangjong, founder of Goryeo, reigned 918 to 943. Gwangjong ended 2.5 centuries of Korean fragmentation and built the country that gave Korea its modern name. After the unified Silla kingdom collapsed in the early 10th century, Korea fragmented into the later 3 kingdoms, a period of civil war between rival states. Gwangjong was a naval commander who rose through military success to found the state of Goryeo in 918, and then spent the next 2 decades reunifying the peninsula through a combination of military campaign, strategic marriage, and political reconciliation. His approach to unification was unusually merciful by the standards of the era. When the last Silla king voluntarily surrendered his kingdom to Goryeo in 935, Gwangjong welcomed him with honor, allowed him to keep his title, and integrated the Silla aristocracy into the Goryeo government rather than destroying them. When the rival state of later Beech fell in 936, he extended similar generosity to those who had opposed him. He understood that a unified Korea built on reconciliation would be more stable than one built on conquest and resentment. He issued the 10 injunctions to his successors, a document of governance philosophy that shaped Goryeo rule for generations. In it, he emphasized the importance of Buddhism, respect for local customs, the danger of excessive taxation, the value of capable ministers over yes men, and the necessity of treating China with careful diplomacy while maintaining Korean independence. It reads like the work of a man who understood both power and its limits with unusual clarity. The dynasty he founded lasted 475 years. The name Goryeo passed through the Arabic and Portuguese merchant trading networks, became the word the rest of the world uses for the country to this day. Korea. It is his kingdom's name, and it belongs to every Korean alive. Number 2. Gwanggaeto the Great. Goguryeo Kingdom. Reigned 391 to 413. Gwanggaeto the Great was 22 years old when he became king of Goguryeo. By the time he died at 39, he had conquered more territory than any Korean ruler in history. The numbers are staggering. Gwanggaeto launched 64 military campaigns during his 18-year reign. He added 64 walled cities and 1,400 villages to Goguryeo's territory. He pushed north into Manchuria, east to the sea, south into the peninsula, and west against the Chinese frontier, transforming Goguryeo from a powerful regional kingdom into the dominant empire of Northeast Asia. His military campaigns were relentless and methodical. Goguryeo's army under Gwanggaeto combined heavy cavalry formations trained for shock warfare with sophisticated siege techniques that could reduce fortified cities. He personally led his forces in the field rather than commanding from a distance, and his presence on the battlefield was a significant factor in the morale and aggression of his troops. His most celebrated intervention came in 400 AD when the kingdom of Silla, threatened with destruction by a combined Japanese and Baekje invasion, sent a desperate appeal for help. Gwanggaeto marched 50,000 soldiers into the southern peninsula, relieved Silla, destroyed the invading forces, and pursued the retreating enemy across the sea to their bases in Japan. It was one of the most dramatic military rescue operations in ancient Korean history, and it established Goguryeo's dominance over the entire region beyond any doubt. His legacy was recorded on the Gwanggaeto stele, a massive carved stone monument erected by his son near the Goguryeo capital. Standing nearly 7 meters tall and covered in nearly 2,000 characters of inscription, it is one of the most important historical documents in Korean history and one of the largest inscribed monuments in Asia. He died in 413, probably from illness, still in his 30s. What he might have continued to build with 2 more decades is impossible to calculate. No Korean ruler before or since expanded the nation's territory as far or as fast. Gwanggaeto was the greatest military king in Korean history. On any other list, he would be number 1. Number 1. King Sejong the Great. Joseon Dynasty. Reigned 1418 to 1450. Over 75 million people use what King Sejong created every single day of their lives. The Korean alphabet, Hangul, is one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of human communication. Before Sejong, Korea used Chinese characters for writing, a system that required years of intensive study to master and was therefore accessible only to the educated elite. The vast majority of Korean people were functionally illiterate in their own language because the writing system did not match the sounds of Korean speech. Sejong considered this a national problem and a moral failure. He convened a small group of scholars in a secret research hall called Jinheung, the Hall of Worthies, and over several years directed the creation of an entirely new writing system designed specifically for the Korean language. Hangul was not adapted from any existing alphabet. It was invented from scratch. with each character representing a specific sound, and the shapes of the characters reflecting the position of the mouth and tongue when making that sound. It is arguably the most scientifically designed writing system ever created. When Sejong announced Hangul to his court in 1443, the reaction from the established Confucian scholars was largely hostile. Learning Chinese characters was a mark of education and social status. Making literacy accessible to commoners threatened the social hierarchy that the noble class depended on. One senior official submitted a formal protest, arguing that creating a Korean alphabet was culturally inferior and politically dangerous. Sejong published Hangul anyway. But the alphabet was only one part of a reign that transformed Korea across almost every field simultaneously. Sejong's court invented the rain gauge, the world's first standardized instrument for measuring rainfall, allowing agricultural planning on a national scale. They developed improved astronomical instruments, creating more accurate celestial calendars that benefited farming across the entire country. They invented an early form of the printing press using movable metal type decades before Gutenberg's work in Europe. They produced comprehensive medical texts, compiling indigenous Korean herbal knowledge that had previously existed only in scattered and inaccessible form. They reformed the legal code to limit the use of torture in judicial proceedings and reduce the maximum punishment for minor offenses. Sejong personally suffered from diabetes and severe eye disease that left him nearly blind in the later years of his reign. He continued governing, continued commissioning research, and continued involving himself in policy detail despite chronic pain and failing eyesight. He had the Confucian texts read aloud to him when he could no longer read them himself. He died in 1450 after 32 years on the throne. His body of achievement in those 3 decades is almost impossible to list completely. Every Korean child learns to read in a matter of weeks because of what Sejong built. Every Korean text message, every newspaper, every novel and poem and government document is written in the alphabet he created. His face is on the Korean 10,001 note. There is a giant statue of him in the center of Seoul, sitting in front of the Gyeongbokgung Palace, watching the city that his dynasty made the capital. Military conquerors are powerful for a generation. What Sejong created is used by an entire nation every single day, 575 years after he made it. That is the difference between greatness and immortality. One special mention: Admiral Yi Sun-sin lived 1545 to 1598. Yi Sun-sin was not a king. He was not a ruler of any kind. He was a naval commander who spent most of his career being demoted, imprisoned, and tortured by the very government he served. He is also the man who saved Korea from destruction. In 1592, Toyotomi Hideyoshi of Japan launched a massive invasion of Korea with over 150,000 troops, intending to use the peninsula as a corridor to conquer China. The Korean army collapsed almost immediately. The Japanese forces advanced so fast that they captured the capital Hanseong, modern Seoul, within 3 weeks. The Korean king fled north. The country appeared to be finished. Sin did not collapse. As commander of the left Jeolla Naval District, he had spent the years before the invasion preparing his forces and commissioning the development of the Turtle ship, the world's first ironclad warship, a vessel with a curved iron-plated roof covered in metal spikes to prevent boarding, cannon ports along its sides, and a dragon head prow from which smoke could be emitted to confuse enemy formations. In battle after battle, he destroyed the Japanese fleet. At Hansen Island in 1592, he lured a Japanese fleet into open water and then deployed his forces in a formation called the Crane Wing, encircling the enemy completely. He destroyed or captured the majority of the Japanese fleet in a single engagement. The Japanese naval capacity never fully recovered. Without naval supremacy, the Japanese could not supply or reinforce their armies in Korea adequately. The invasion stalled. Chinese forces entered to support Korea. The Japanese were eventually forced to withdraw. Sin won 23 naval engagements during the war. He lost none. He was demoted twice during the war through court political intrigue, stripped of his command, imprisoned, and tortured. Each time he was eventually reinstated because no one else could win. He returned to command each time without complaint and continued winning. He died in 1598 at the Battle of Noryang, struck by a musket ball in the final engagement of the war as the last Japanese forces retreated from Korean waters. His final words to the men around him were, "The battle is at its height. Do not announce my death." His men obeyed. They kept fighting, and the Japanese fleet was destroyed. Korea survived because of one man who was never given a throne and never needed one. 10 rulers across 3,000 years of Korean history. From the legendary founder who crossed a river on the backs of fish, to the king who gave his people their own voice in their own alphabet. Every one of them shaped the peninsula that is today home to one of the most dynamic civilizations on Earth. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and leave a comment telling us which ruler you think deserves the top spot. Our next video takes us to the ancient world, counting down the greatest pharaohs in Egyptian history, rulers who built monuments that have survived for 4,000 years and whose names are still spoken today. We will see you there.